with the ZBrush and just admire a 5 meter tall Sylvester Stallone. Is there anything better? No. A really big fan of 80s movies, action movies, old classic kind of movies. And really like robots and that kind of stuff. So as we wait for this to load, okay, I think. Alright, first I want to just quickly load up a different material because Pixelogic has a terrible taste and they chose the wrong default material, which is biased. But just to show you a little bit more of what I want to hopefully be able to get to today, I don't think I will, just because of the time. But this is the same robot that Devin showed you from his scene. So this is the small one kind of on the right. And this is just a ZBrush sketch that I did for it. So it's kind of like a Wall-E character, kind of something like that, Johnny Five. And this probably took more than the amount of time we'll have, but you know, to go in and be able to detail out all these pieces, and most of them are simple. Most of these are cubes or something like that. So if I can just select one, you see this is really just a cylinder. This piece is a few different pieces. And if I have both of these files up at the same time, the computer might crash. So I'm going to have to close this and then restart it real fast. There he is. Every time I see that thing, it makes me laugh a little bit. It's the most ridiculous picture, I think. Yeah. I'm a photographer. Yeah. Totally. All right. So how many of you guys have experience with ZBrush? Any? You can raise your hands. A few? Good. For those of you who don't, this is going to be very much of a crash course. So I'm just going to start working, and I have a lot of hotkeys and stuff set up, so I'm not really going to go through any of the actual menus. So you're just going to watch it happen, I guess. Trying to shove everything into one folder, and I don't know where to put it all. I'm just going to start with a very basic mesh. This is a mesh I use for a lot of different things, but this is the program silo, which is a 3D modeling package. And like Maya and things like that, they have default primitives, like a cube and a cylinder and a sphere. This is one of Silo's primitives, is this guy. So I really like to use this because the topology is really good for pretty much whatever you want to do with it. And we can quickly start changing this. So I'm going to turn on symmetry, which means I have these two cursors. And just go to my move tool. So now I can start doing this kind of a thing, right? And I'm also going to start masking stuff. And I'm going to make some selections. So quickly, some of this won't make sense very quickly, but I'm going to start hiding things. I don't have all of my screen space that I normally do. What I'm doing is I'm making selections. And this makes it so that if I want to, I can easily isolate something and just focus on that area. So each of these different colors now I can quickly select. I can hide them, I can show them. And just like I do programs like Photoshop, I can also mask. So if I want to pull something, it doesn't affect that part. So the robot I wanted to make today was kind of like a droid robot, or a battle robot. So I'm going to just start destroying this thing and just kind of messing it up. And I can smooth and I can get rid of all this kind of stuff. And I'm really not paying attention to topology. Topology, for those of you that don't know, is pose a little bit, start to move some of this. One thing that's different I've noticed about robots recently, and it was a sudden epiphany, was that they're a lot like bugs in the way that if you look at a human body, all of typically the bigger parts of the body are the parts in between the joints, whereas bugs, the big parts of bugs are the joints. So I've been playing around with that a little bit. Maybe we'll make this feet super small. And since robots don't really need to have waists, we can make this. I can hide these arms really fast. Make it kind of so this part is going to intersect into this part. And this is really just a silhouette. So if I even I'll switch this to a different material. I can just purely work in silhouette. So I can even mask. I can move. I can change my brushes to something that's a little bit more stretchy. And when it comes back to shaded view, I can figure out what it is then. So I just want to work on the arms for a little bit. Maybe I'll change the pose. Stretch them out. Smooth out some of this stuff. And by the way, now that I'm kind of in work mode, pretty much be doing this for the rest of the talk. And I feel pretty comfortable if you guys want to just ask me questions while I work. So if you guys have questions about really anything, whether it's work or anything, go ahead and give me a shout out, because I can't see you. Yep. The way I work is, I think, a little different than some people. A lot of people will make lots of little sketches, like thumbnails, or whether it's in pencil or Photoshop or pen or something like that. And the way I call it is I tend to work evolutionarily, which I don't know if that's a word, but step by step. So I start at one very kind of simple thing, and I will progress that. So I don't want to have human hands. I kind of want to change this pose a little bit. So I'm going to do. So I'm just going to probably actually save that for a little bit later when I start getting a little bit more detail. Yes.
During your work at Marvel, do you have some blocking points from the transition from the traditional comics to the modern?
Sure. Well, I mean, to be clear, I have not worked in comics. I only work in movies. I work in Marvel Studios is, how would you say, I guess they only focus on any of the movies surrounding the Avengers. So Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, Guardians of the Galaxy, Ant-Man, Doctor Strange coming out, Black Panther, now Spider-Man. Any of those movies are the movies I work on. I do not work on the X-Men movies, the Fantastic Four movies, the old Spider-Man movies. So what I just did is I added some subdivisions. What that does is it takes the mesh that I had before. I still have it, I can still access it. But I added a few more levels of detail. You can think of it in Photoshop like up-resing the pixels, bigger pixel size. So now I can get a little bit more detail in. But as far as transitioning, since I didn't work in comics, I've only really worked in 3D. start a project, I will go get a bunch of references, and then I will kind of move on from there. If I'm starting like I am now, I will more or less work for a little while. I want to try to get the shape, like I want the happy accidents or something to happen without reference, right? And then once I kind of get an idea of where I'm going, I will pull out references and apply that to it. So I'm going to go too far now. Yep.
Transitioning from movies to games, what was your experience? Did you find it difficult in any way?
The biggest transition, I think, between video games and film for me was the size of the cog that you are of the machine. So for me, in movies, you are a small cog, you are very specialized, and you tend to be a little bit more, typically, sometimes, depending on the game, if you're working on Call of Duty or something like that, maybe not, but movies tend to be a little bigger, more blockbuster. Whereas games, sometimes, again, Call of Duty's maybe an exception, but the size of the team is much smaller, and there's less people between you and the end product on the screen.
When you work on groups,
Yes.
the analysts, did you send them the iPhone or did you take them to make a manageable version of the movie?
Textures, no. I send them by poly. If this doesn't work out for me, this sketch, I do have a backup one that I worked last night for about 20 minutes, which looks like this, but probably better. I might just do that. Just so I have something better to work with for you guys. See? You can see I was trying to make it again, but I was good. So using that same stuff, I'm going to just kind of progress from this one, because it's on the way there. So I've sketched out and using very, very roughly some tools to sketch in areas of possible detail, possible interest, forms, shapes. For robot stuff, it can be pistons, it can be glass, whatever you really want it to be. What I have not paid attention to, and if any of you guys are big 3D guys, this stuff is bad. Having topology laying on top of itself and stuff like that. So I'm going to try to get rid of that and kind of start from a new, fresh base. The other thing that I did is I took these fingers and I just merged them together so that they became like a claw. So all I care about right now is just the idea. It's a weird little flying thing, Sometimes sound effects work better than explanation. One of my old bosses, Charlie, would make all kinds of sound effects, and for a while I thought it was really strange. It's like, what does he think? He'll stand over your shoulder, and he'd look at it, and he would go, yeah, that looks good. What? Okay. And then now I find myself doing it, I'm like, oh. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, like trying to think about the mechanics of the character here that you're designing.
Not so much, a little bit like hinting at like maybe these, like I'll add a little bit more detail first before I do anything else. So I add another level of detail and say maybe like this could be like a piston. We'll make this a collar, some sort of big collar with another big collar. These would be like pistons that kind of come in. This will be kind of a central piece where everything's going to be, hide the arms, everything here is going to be kind of locked into this, built off this. Kind of like this weird wedge shape. So kind of trim that off. And typically, the only things as far as mechanics that I do think about is range of movement. So if this is a solid piece and this is a solid piece, if they were trying to move, they would like hit up against each other. So what I'll do is something kind of like just start hinting like, okay, well this part in here should be more flexible or should have more pieces in it that could move. Maybe this part in here should be pistons that will make this part will make this part move, just like a hamstring does. So I am referencing anatomy and referencing mechanics, but not specifics in that way. So we'll just throw in some lines and say that's, like if I zoom out, that's some sort of an interesting detail that can go in there. So I don't know entirely what these are. Just make some little plates. We'll make a little cab section where there's like pistons or something that will go in here.
What is the basic goal of sculpting from scratch? What do we need to achieve at the end?
I mean, eventually they would call it retopologize. So eventually I retopologize and make it look nice. But the thing I like about sculpting from scratch is I'm not bound by anything. If I wanted to, I could start and just work on sections, or the head, or use existing models or kit bash or something like that. And you could still kit bash with this, but the thing that I think, in my opinion, is that kit bash should only be really used for details. It should be used for details or filler or things that are, not the main part of design, unless they're very simple. There's a lot of really cool kit bash kits out there now for wheels and cogs and pistons and all different kinds of things. I'll focus on the head for a while. So kind of have this owlish thing going on, which I think is interesting. Maybe try to keep some of those shapes in there. And duplicate or add more detail. So some of these little wobbles and stuff where it's not looking great, I'm not really worried about. I do want to clean it up a little bit for when I'm going to do the next process, which is where I dynamesh it, which is a feature where it will take all this topology and it will remesh it. And I can start working from scratch again. Or not from scratch, but it makes it easy to sculpt on top of stuff like this. There's like I like how some of these shapes are coming down. Make a little thing like this. I think that's actually a shape that's in Voltron, but that's okay, we'll keep going. Sometimes when you work on stuff, after a while I've noticed that I tend to create a little bit of a sensibility of past projects. So if I do something, sometimes that project will end up a little bit in something new. Yeah, you got a little drinking fountain in there. Maybe we put some, like, little, pelvis piece. The other thing to answer the question again of why I like doing it from scratch is because I think it's the most fun. So in this area in the shoulder, I could either design a shape or I could start importing shapes. So I think I'll kind of like this cylinder look where there's a big distance here, but it's not a cylinder. It's not a pure circle. And some of this needs to be worked out. Something here. And about now, I'm going to start looking for some of those connecting shapes and those rhythms that we talked about earlier. Where I want to see, forms connecting to other forms. I want to see, we're not going to get too much into color if at all, but how do we start integrated design? How do we start, okay, so I just created this line here, right? Just this one line kind of in the pectoral area. How can I start pointing that into other areas? So maybe if I took, let's see, we'll make a new piece, just a pen, we'll use the cylinder, I guess. It's huge. Shrink that down. And kind of get it in place. Sometimes getting the simple primitives can take a little bit of time to kind of finesse in place. Turn this on. We will divide it a few times. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a brush that's called the clip curve. And that will let me take this and I can choose that line and kind of clip it. So now it's at this ish angle. Maybe I can mirror that across. You can use the mirror and weld feature, but sometimes it doesn't work. So I have to flip it real fast. So we'll go to the other side, and we'll do this. So I liked how this part of it was pulled up, and this part of it was kind of pulled down. So I can use that feature. Got a chunk of that. So now I've got a few different things happening at once. I've got starting to implement new pieces. What the new pieces let me do is I can start using, rather than spending my time going and carving a line like this, saying, okay, this is where this is going to go, and that's where that's going to go. I can just put a new piece on top, and that will create that line for me. Maybe make this part right here, oops, mask this, let's try to pull that in, so that that's a hard edge. And we could even, at this point, typically I don't, but because I've already got a little bit of a theme there going with that panel, I'll sketch in a detail or a line where the panels will be connected. And this is very similar actually to what Devin said earlier about kind of finding the crack, right? So I had a sketch, I had a rough area. I've spent a little bit of time refining one part of it. And what that lets me do is it gives me a little bit of a theme to start running with. It's kind of interesting, maybe this is kind of pulled off. It's almost like a dome. And all this you can see is very, very rough, so maybe I'll start pulling, even it out. And always save. I'm going to use a feature called lazy mouse. Turn this radius way up. The way lazy mouse works, just to give you a quick intro on that, is it's like drawing with a string. So if I draw, you notice my cursor is moved, like before, as soon as I move the cursor, it sketches. If I turn this on, there's a string, and the cursor, the stroke does not happen until the string has hit the length. So if I pull, this is now the length of the string, and that lets me create really nice smooth lines. So even if I keep shaking like this, I can have a pretty smooth line without really doing too much to it.
Did you get to implement the new demodel features in your parser modeling machines?
Not too much yet. I've used them just a little bit. They're good from what I've seen. The things that I don't like about them is that it's very much like modeling in Maya or something from scratch, where typically I'd have to be building it piece by piece again. And the thing I like about doing this is that it lets me, kind of be more free. And now I gotta figure out something up here. So I started to get some of this planar hard edges in there. Sometimes I'll just swap to a different material. And these are not really to make it look better. It's more to give me a little change of pace, fresh eyes. And then I actually have a bunch of them. Some of which are just simple and easy to look at, like this. Sometimes the tablet freaks out and I have to force it to start over. I like this idea of possibly a mustache. So I don't really have any specifics in mind right now, but just kind of possibly getting some details out. Some sort of maybe evil warrior robot type thing. And maybe I'll mask off this. So his head is starting to feel a little too sunken in, or at least the head itself is feeling too sunken. And I can just start masking this. Turn off the mask so I can still sculpt. And not, again, trying to keep the geometry too good. Trying to create some of that separation. Now, before I get into too much of this, I go back to the lower levels. And just adjust some proportions. you see that flashing up when you're choosing a new or different kind of brush? So even selecting the other areas there. Don't know if this will work. Nope. Make it work. Didn't do it right. Sometimes you work with the tool and sometimes you fight the tool. I think it would be interesting to create a different shape in here. We've got a lot of wave shapes, but I'm not sure if that's good or bad. And if we're going to have them, might as well commit to them. This is all really, really wavy and maybe a little too complicated. Some of this right here is looking a little too simple. Just kind of pull some of this. Second, I'll probably take this and start breaking it up into little pieces. I wanted to get some of this in there. It's really very weak and unsupported, so I want to introduce some stronger shapes from that angle. I don't know about the back here, but the nice thing about ZBrush is you can always go back to your lower subdivision levels, which is, this is where we started. And I can tweak these. So I can pull some of this down, and maybe play around with that line here, maybe we can get an X shape going. And everything will stay. Or almost everything. Any more questions for now? I don't know how long it is. I think we're going to take a break at like an hour. But I lost track of time already. It's been an hour. All right. Should we take a 15-minute break and then come back? Huh? We don't care. All right. No, I don't care. I don't know. Oh, yes. Yes. One of my favorite sculptures is Rodin. That's probably my favorite. But, yeah, we went to Paris on our honeymoon, which was about a year ago. And we went to the Rodin Museum. That was amazing. But Bocelli is real good. They have had several art exhibitions of him in LA. too many organic kind of wavy forms in here that I want to start tying together. Thinking. Another thing I can start doing if some of this is starting to get a little wobbly is I can start appending other objects. So we'll go back to this. So now that's already that shape. Duplicate it first so I have a master copy. And I duplicated of that one. There we go. And what I can do with this is I can just start pulling it in the same shapes I was sculpting. And now I'll be able to get a little bit of that, the negative space and the areas, in between, and I don't have to worry about just trying to sculpt a cylinder. I can use a cylinder. And then from there, I can just take these because they're already kind of in the right place. I can duplicate those. Say, okay, we're thinking about doing smaller ones in the center. And now I can just start sculpting into this, just like the real pieces would be. So I can start to trace those edges. Maybe we'll take one of these big ones in the center. Cylinders are always easy and nice to start with because you can turn them pretty much into anything. Some of these ones over here. These can be pistons, we can turn them into pistons. They can be some sci-fi, super strong hydraulic tube. to right now is that there's you can't cut something in half. So I'm trying to hide this little piece in the very center. That's okay.
From what I understand, you're basically more focused on the creature design, or at least that's what I understand you like to. At any point in your career, did you ever run into something you found difficult to sculpt, or that you had trouble that you had to remaster in order to satisfy a certain project or something like that?
They were like, congratulations, now you sculpt a sea turtle, and now you sculpt a Komodo dragon, and now you sculpt a mahi-mahi fish, and now you sculpt a tuna fish. And I made like 7 animals after they saw that I finally learned how to make an animal. It was still fun, it's fun types of projects.
They probably wanted to cash in on the investment.
That's probably true, yeah. Like we finally got it. We were so close to firing him. And I don't know if that's true, but yeah, they probably did just want to cash in on that. The inside, some curve.
So like ZBrush is inherently like really organic in this way.
Yeah.
How have you trained yourself to kind of see the art of the surface shapes while you're working like this?
I think a lot of practice, a lot of spending time in like high poly models. So I spent a lot of time modeling cars. I've done a lot of Iron Man suits, which I only poly model. So from scratch in Maya every time. Because they're all just different enough that we can't really reuse them. And then the tools have gotten better enough that you can kind of, interesting, you can kind of start to actually have more precise choices. And I kind of learned for a while, like, this is still very organic, at least the shapes are. But that it's not all about the, like, hard surface does not mean every edge is planar. Like, it's the balance between some forms being very soft and some forms being very, very hard. Alright, so I think we'll make it a mesh. And we'll save it again. I save a lot. When I finished the Mark 42 Iron Man, I had 245 versions. And that was after he was not, we found out he was not renamed the Mark 8, because we thought it was the Mark 8 after the Mark 7. So then we found out it was actually the Mark 42. So I had 140 versions of Mark 8, and then 245 versions, 247 versions of the Mark 42, which is about 400 versions of Iron Man files. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this mesh and make a nice geometry so I can sculpt out of it. And before I do that, one thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to change my polygroups. So all the polygroups are these colors again. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change them so that they are kind of broken up by the areas that we hid them. So now we have kind of this chunk that is hidden into this piece, this chunk that is the torso piece, and this chunk that is that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into split, group split, and we'll name it to be careful of, ZBrush users, is that this is not undoable. So I usually, just in case, make a duplicate. And now if I just go to solo, it will just be the arm. And then we'll just have the head, and we'll just have the body. And so now I can start refining these even further, except I have this weird mesh right here. So I'm going to go in here and get the clip curve. I kind of clip that down. Some of these details we don't really need. So that's now really flat. I'm going to do this to the bottom as well. The arms is probably fine. And I'm going to duplicate each one of these because I always want a master copy. I'll delete the extras when I'm done. Duplicate. Go to Geometry, Dynamesh. And Dynamesh will take this bad topology, which we see here. This is really gross. And it will reproject it with different topology. And it will also close these holes. It got really low res because I didn't change the slider. So if I turn this up, we'll just choose an arbitrary number, 400. It will now give me a more accurate representation of what I have. I'm going to just fill out some of these little areas. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into ZRemesh, which takes this mesh that's easy to sculpt on, but kind of bad topology. And I just hit this button, it makes it really easy. This bar doesn't usually take too long. And now we have a nice mesh that follows the flow of where we're going. Now if I want, I can go back in, and I can take the detail from this and project it to that. So what I'll do is I'll just show these two, so they're sitting on top of each other. And we'll go and subdivide, maybe twice, maybe once. And we'll hit project all. And so now my mesh has the detail. And I can go back in here and I can smooth this out. But it's my nice mesh with the detail of the old mesh. And now I can start breaking this up. So this is why I don't really care, especially at the beginning, about topology. Because eventually I'm just going to delete what I had anyways. So this one that has the hole in it is the old one. And I just delete that. Not undoable, be careful with that. Duplicate our master. Dynamesh 400 is good. Kept most of the detail. I might go a little higher, maybe 550. And those numbers are not numbers that I know. I'm just going up a little bit, a little bit. So that looks pretty good. And now again, we'll go back to the ZRemesher button. Which is pretty decent topology. And again, rinse and repeat. Subdivide, subdivide, project. So now you see that this matches. If I toggle back and forth between them, you'll see on the right, all you can see is really that one has a hole and one doesn't have a hole, and there's some slight differences. So now I take the one with the hole, this one, delete. So I rinse and repeat this for the rest of the thing. We'll just do this last one very, very quick. This one does not need to be reprojected, I don't think. Maybe after I say it doesn't. Oh, sorry, I already overwrote it, but that's okay. So now we've got this. We've also got this original guy, but we don't need him anymore. So I just delete that. And this is also why I save a lot, because all of a sudden you start deleting chunks and things start happening and you realize, oh, I really need that. So what that helps me do is now if I want to start getting into some more of the nitty-gritty details, makes it really easy to start coming in for that. And none of these are going to be perfect models. These are all sketches. This is a concept. This is an exploration of an idea. That's kind of interesting. So sometimes it'll look good from one angle, and I'll maybe start pulling and shaping from other angles as well. Any questions so far? Are there any ZBrush questions? Career questions?
What's the process of working with the board with the director?
Usually the director usually has an idea of what he wants. And so sometimes some directors are very good at explaining or communicating their ideas, and sometimes they're not, and they want to see you explore avenues. So typically what will happen is the team or whoever pitches you, you will get a script, or you will be told, or a brief, or something like that, that explains to you what the character is and roughly what they should look like. And then you will take your pass on it. You will go away, work on it for a little while, and then when you come back, you present it, and you can either pitch it if you're in the room, or if somebody else does that for you, or email or whatever. And then at the end of the day, he will give you notes, and he either says, I like it, keep going on this, or I don't like it, let's try something new. And then that goes back and forth for a long time until you get to the final. Other times, like in Guardians of the Galaxy, when I did that very, very first group concept, there was no director. So that was more of a, how do we try to figure out what we're going to do here? Do whatever you want, and then if and when the director comes in, we will address it then. Split off the head. Probably should have done this before we did all that other work.
What kind of tablet do you use?
Just a Wacom. This is a 4, I believe. Wacom 4. I think most people use Wacoms. I used to use a Cintiq, but I ended up just not really liking the Cintiq as much. It's nice for texture painting and for things like that, but when it comes to, if you're going to be working on it all day, typically the screens get very hot. And you get very uncomfortable. So the way my process works is I'm kind of trying to work slowly over the whole character, so that it's all kind of being built at the same time. Grab that pinch brush. Typical eye thing, maybe. clay brush here to kind of make some circles, thinking about possibly putting in one or a few eyes. Maybe clip it off. It's also very good for making hard shapes. Interesting. Move it out a little bit. Right now, I'm really just searching for something. When it looks too much like a face, always looks a little creepy. Adding some curve and convexity to some of the forms. Because the rest of the body is so organic, and it kind of needs it. So we can also start importing things like that. We'll give like this little weird circle mouth. We'll go into these are the Z primitives. And adjust these as well. What? I thought I was plugged in. That's not good. Hold on, please.
Do we need to start over? Alex, I think I like that one. Începem workshop yet?
Like these. OBJs. OBJs are a file type. Some of these takes shouldn't take too long. So what it does is it imports them. And they're all going to stay in the same positions. ZBrush does have some cool new features now where you can actually do a bridge between key shot. And ZBrush, it's really awesome, but I don't have it on this computer. It just makes it a little faster. Computer's heating up. Let's close this. I actually hit the wrong button, so I was trying to load a bunch of textures. Oops. But basically what this program does is it has a bunch of pre-made materials that I can drag and put on, and pre-made lighting scenarios that I can drag and put in here, and it will render them accordingly. And what I'm going to do is just quickly try to get out a few passes very, very, very quickly, and then paint on top of those in Photoshop. As soon as this loads. Pretty big library. This should be a sales pitch for KeyShot, just to show you how many things are in here. Good job. So I'm just going to drag the same material onto everything. If I was doing something like an Iron Man or something like I've done before, I would probably go ahead and give like the gold parts for the Iron Man example. Gold parts, gold, and red parts red. What I'm doing right now is I'm just overwriting like a small little chunk somewhere. So everything is this black. I can also go to the environments. I was worried it was going to load those up too. And we can drag and drop different lighting scenarios. Some of these are outdoors, some of them are going to make it look very different. This one is actually usually pretty big. We're going to use this indoor one. This one's pretty simple, pretty popular. And I can rotate the environment around it. What I like to do is I like to adjust the contrast just a little bit. going to take the background. I'm going to take the background, I'm just going to turn it to a color. I usually make it black so it's easier to see. For you guys, it will not be easy to see though. Also, I chose black, which is probably bad for you guys for the first pass. So we'll change that real fast. Aha. Really, I probably want paints. They have all these different types of paints, metallic paint. Something that's going to come out. There we go. And what I'm going to do is, the longer I let it sit, the more it's going to render. But I just want to get some basic things out. So I'm going to select the material, and I'm just going to change it slightly. There are all these settings that are pretty simple. Metal coverage is like how much metal it is. Is it not metal at all, or is it totally metal? In the middle, I usually like fine. You can turn it to a full chrome. You can turn it to a very broad one. Something kind of like this. I don't think these will take that long, but we should just check it. It does take too long, we will stop it. And I'm not going to do huge renders. You can set huge renders, which I've done. They can take entire nights to render out a single frame. That's fine. Let's see how long this takes. Yeah. So you can see it's starting at the very, very center, and it's starting to render out a nice image. That's going to take too long. So I'm going to stop, because I'm going to do a bunch of these. So I'm just going to do maximum 1 minute. So waste a few minutes here just getting these renders out. But we'll only have to wait a minute per, and I'll probably do 4 or 5. During that time, if anybody has questions, that would be a good time to ask them. Sometimes I do like the renders that I'm doing now, I'm basically making compositing passes. Sometimes I do them in ZBrush, sometimes I do them in KeyShot. It really depends on what the image is. Typically super shiny things are a perfect candidate to be rendered in KeyShot because it's mostly made for automotive and production, like product design. So vacuums and toasters and stuff like that are really, really, really good to be done in this. And it's still good for this kind of stuff, but it usually needs a little bit of painting on top of it to make it nice. At this point, that's not really the concern. Eventually, after I was doing like a full, nice model, yeah, I would do that. But for right now, we're mostly wanting to focus on just like concept and math grade. This is mostly about getting the idea.
So this is basically an exploration sketch.
Yes.
So you mentioned earlier something like a nice model.
Yeah.
How do you approach that? They use the sketch, break it down, and develop it some more, or would you build from the very from zero altogether, looking at the sketch?
Approaching a model is very different because, like you said, you have something to start from. It depends on the quality of the concept art. If the concept art is very fine, I usually spend 4 hours just looking at it if it's really good. And what I do is I spend some time looking at it, just kind of visually digesting, drawing on top of it for different reasons, like the lines that you saw, trying to figure out proportionally what's really going on, trying to figure out if there's the repeating shapes. So a lot of it is just really trying to figure out exactly what made it good in the first place when approaching a new model like that. But that's more typically when I'm doing that, I'm doing just a poly model. So I also start poly modeling from scratch, similar to what you saw Devin do. And just kind of build it up very slowly. So it takes more time to do it that way.
If you were to make a polynomial based on the sketch that you just made right now, would you use anything from this sketch?
I would only use it as a reference.
So
Just a reference, yeah. I would throw at the end, similar to how I did a quick model, and then I started breaking the pieces into smaller pieces. And then I threw away the original one. I'm going to do the same thing again. So I'm going to take this model when it's a concept sketch, and I'm going to build new pieces, better pieces on top of that. I'm going to build this one again. So all I'm getting right now is some lighting passes. So this I will use for a ring light. And we'll do one in a color, I think.
What would you use to unwrap complex models, organic models? Those are quite tricky to unwrap.
Sure. Typically, I mean, honestly, you can use ZBrush for that stuff, for organic models, using whatever it's called, the UV Master. It's actually pretty good. But the Maya tools, especially now that they've started to incorporate Unfold 3D, which is an Unfold UV unwrapping program, that's actually very good as well, just the Maya straight up stuff.
So your Maya,
Yeah, I use Maya. I started in 3ds Max, I guess almost 10 years ago now. But then I switched to Maya when I was going to Gnomon because they were a Gnomon is a Maya only school. So in order to learn all the pipeline and specific terms, I kind of had to switch. Even though it sounds like now, Creative Monkeys, you guys use After Effects because you're used to it. I use Maya because I'm used to it. So if I were to, recommend to a new modeler, if they wanted to learn modeling from scratch, I would say you don't need to use Maya. You can use Modo, you can use Silo, you can use whatever you want. It doesn't really matter. There's better programs out there. I think 3ds Max is a better modeler. I think Softimage is a better modeler than Maya. But I'm used to this one. Cool. So we have 4 images now that I'm just going to quickly comment. So I have a metal one. This one I'm going to use as a rim light. This is just a red paint. This is a kind of a shadow illusion pass. That's what I use it as. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to select the background. And I usually just turn this tolerance to 0 because it's a JPEG. Probably sometimes you get these little things like that, so I usually sometimes 2 or something like that works better. And I'm going to blur most of the edges anyway, so on this particular thing, I'm not super concerned. So I have this layer on top that's covering the whole thing with black, so even if there was nothing, I have this, basically a mask. But it makes it so I can start compositing stuff easier. We're going to turn this one into I'll turn on the red one as a bottom. This, I start using blending modes. If I use soft light, sometimes you get an interesting effect. You can also use overlay as well to get a different harsher effect. But we can also just use it as a silver. This is going to be our rim light, so if I turn this into a screen, you see it affects that. And mostly I'm going to adjust the levels on this so that the amount that's coming through is less. This one is going to be our overlay, but sometimes it's a little harsh, especially if it's probably getting really dark. You can also use soft light, which tends to wash it out, and you can also use multiply, which will make all the black areas of this image darker. I'm going to use overlay and just turn this opacity really, really low down, but just enough so it's going to kind of push the eyes and push the lows down. I have silver, which has this stuff on top of it as well. And what I usually do for this is I will take a mask, and I'll invert it, and now I can select it, and I can just start painting. So, if we were not on a time crunch, I would have probably taken this and maybe spent some time to develop some of the color a little better, or to figure out what the color would have been. So right now I'm just going to basically freestyling. And the renders would have been a little higher quality, but this is perfectly good for demo. Maybe there's some sort of understructure over here. There's silver. And the nice thing is, since it was 2 separate materials, when I rendered it out, the highlights and everything are responding accordingly. One is a metallic paint, one is a gloss paint. I don't know if you guys can see any of that there. I'll get some of this. And I can also just invert my brush and make that stuff go away. Eventually, once I've kind of got something going that I like, I'm going to just start painting on top of this with normal brushes. So kind of going a little Ferrari here. It's fine. And another thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take a layer here, and I'm just going to make it a color layer. And I can start adjusting some of these colors, whether I want these to be, or I can also make a multiply layer or a saturation layer to really start getting rid of some of this. I think I kind of would like it if these were black. So we'll make them desaturated. Just going to paint over all this with a black color. And if I duplicate this and now turn it into a multiply layer, turn this way down, probably start getting some kind of cool effects. Even though it's totally probably black here, but adding black is maybe a bad idea. Cool. And also in this, I'm just going to generally zoom into this. Put levels on top of this to help you guys see a little bit. I can turn this off and on. But I'm going to start painting into these areas here just to start pushing some of those shadows. It's very much like ambient occlusion, if you want to call it that. It's other things like that. I'm just going to toggle this back off and on so I can kind of see what it's doing. And now I'm going to take a new layer at the very, very top. Turn the hardness down, make it a kind of thin brush. And I'm just going to start color picking. So I know this is kind of black. Highlights are kind of this color on the red, so I can start selecting things, and if I want it to be a specific shape or a specific color, I can do that. I don't really know what I'm going to do with that yet, but now I can really start taking any of these shapes, and start painting over it. So this will be some heart line of some kind. We can start adding new things as well. We don't have to just follow the existing shapes. Some of this bright red again. Those highlights. And then again some more of that white. And then pop some of them. So the difference between the painting is kind of this to this. So now you can see that the sketch, the ZBrush sketch is important. It's kind of the underbase of my new painting. Since I don't draw from scratch well, just like Devin, my biggest problem with drawing from scratch is perspective, which I think is the most foundation thing that what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to find light that's hitting this in the way that I want somewhere else on the image. Maybe this color. And I'll paint in there a little bit just to kind of get that in. Sometimes some of these little artifacts that I'm seeing here could be some of this. Oh, I realized these weren't even on. Okay. What color do I have? Choose some detail line. Kind of got that bird, went back to that bird shape, so something that's going to mimic some of that. And then for this stuff up here, I can do a few different things. So because it's all jagged, I can either just start painting it into the edge. This could be the new edge. I could have spent more time rendering it. That's another option. But sometimes you don't have enough time. You just kind of use what you got. And this side actually looks pretty good. If I maybe take this white, I can run it along the edge. Maybe connect it a little. So now that I've got, I'm just going to really focus on this area right now because of time. But now we've kind of got that first layer in. What I would do is I would take a gradient, put it over the whole thing. Okay, it looks bad there then. So putting some of it on top. I've erased most of it, but there's still some of it there. Downsize this. Anything that's kind of more in shadow, maybe I can more in the shadow of that gradient. I can start to push that. So I made my eraser the same brush. I got white smoke as well. Since we're only focusing on this area. Let me turn that down too. And you can still paint through this, which is one of the nice things. If you start setting up your start setting it up early, you can actually just paint straight through it. And all that will stay there. Is that really dark? And so some of these weird shapes that I had made, just going to kind of get rid of some of those little imperfections. just kind of finessing some of those shapes a little bit. Some of these little highlights here. And I would go as well, and I would do one final pass, and this will be the last thing I do. I'll turn some of this down. Even though it won't look as great for you guys, because I want to pop some highlights and stuff. One last layer. I'm going to make an overlay layer. And I'm going to make one side of my brush white, one side black. So the black side is going to push stuff back, the white side is going to push stuff forward. So I can go through here. Push this back. So I don't really know what that thing is. So pushing forward, pushing forward. Back. And I can do it subtly as well. Doesn't have to be just harsh lines. We got the red thing going on, just give him some red eyes. We are at red school, right? Do that, and I'll toss up a color dodge layer on top. And just these settings, and flip these, because it'll interact differently. So you can see that's that last little push. Turn on the levels later for you. The last little push, you can kind of see the areas of pushing and pulling out. Some eyes. There's just black. Get that out of the way. I think that's probably it. I'll put on the levels for you again, just so you can kind of see a little better. Turn it off. Let's turn it down a little bit. Is that better? Yeah. Cool. All right, that's it. Thank you, guys.